Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this Your Voice, Your Future debate focusing on the race for governor of Arkansas. I'm Chris May. Tonight, you will hear from two candidates who are hoping to become the Democratic Party's nominee for the fall campaign. The winner will take on the candidate who emerges from the GOP primary, either incumbent Governor Asa Hutchinson or Hot Springs business owner Jan Morgan, as well as the Libertarian Party candidate Mark West. The candidates who are with us tonight are Leticia Sanders and Jared Henderson. Tonight's debate is brought to you by KETV Channel 7 and Talk Business and Politics. In this debate's first segment, I'll pose questions to the candidates, along with this gentleman right here, the editor-in-chief of Talk Business and Politics, Roby Brock. Roby, good to see you.
Good to see you.
In the second segment, I'll be joined for additional questions by Arkansas Advocates for Children and Families, Tamika Edwards. Now, the candidates have not seen these questions in advance. Each will be given 90 seconds in which to answer, and after both have been addressed the question, an additional 30 seconds will be available for rebuttal. We'll try to do our best to keep them to that time. The questions will be asked in an order that was determined by a random lottery earlier tonight. The candidates will end the debate with closing statements, and they'll begin the debate right now with their opening remarks. And first up, Ms. Sanders.
Hello, I'm Leticia Sanders, and I want to thank you for having me on this debate tonight. It's very prominent that this happened for the people to be able to have a chance to pick the right candidate. And I just want to let you know that I'm originally from Chicago. I moved to Arkansas in '94, and I moved in the '90s and graduated from high school at Hall High in '94. And the reason why I'm running for governor was because I've lived the struggle as well. I'm one of the people that I'm advocating for. So it's very important that we address the concerns of the people, because this is why we're here. We have seen 45 different Democratic governors, and no change have come about it as of yet. So I'm stepping up to the plate to make sure that the people can actually get what they need.
All right, Ms. Sanders, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Henderson, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to thank you all for hosting and for moderating. I'd like to thank Leticia for joining me tonight. It's really great to be here. And I have to thank my wife for supporting me and making my candidacy possible. You know, when I was growing up in this state, Arkansas was called the land of opportunity. And that's what it's been for me. I spent 17 years in Arkansas public schools and universities. I grew up in Springdale and graduated from the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. And that set me up for some pretty incredible opportunities in science, in business, in state and local government, and most recently in education, recruiting and training teachers in eastern and southern Arkansas. You know, and I had all these opportunities in Arkansas, even though I came from a very common Arkansas family. You know, I was adopted in the first week of my life into a family where 2 generations ago, my grandmother went to the 8th grade twice because high school wasn't available. And through her hard work, she helped make it possible for my mom to go to and through high school, even though she didn't get to graduate college, and neither did my father. You know, with this family, I had incredible opportunities, but in the last decade of my career in particular, I've seen firsthand that these opportunities are not universal, that there's far too many kids, there's far too many communities where this opportunity is not available. And I'm running to be the next governor of Arkansas because I believe that this is wrong, and I know it doesn't have to be this way. We can improve our schools, we can make it easier to start and build strong small businesses, we can safeguard health care, and we can make a dramatic decrease in generational poverty. But it starts with Arkansans expecting more out of our leaders.
Okay, Mr. Henderson, thank you so much. We will stay with you for the first question, and it will be posed by Roby.
All right, Mr. Henderson, Governor Asa Hutchinson has offered the Arkansas National Guard for service to patrol the southern border of the U.S. Would you be supportive of using the National Guard to be used for immigration, security, and patrolling?
Yeah. Only if a convincing and compelling case has been made. You know, I want secure borders as much as any other citizen of this country. But what's remarkable to me is that we've called up the National Guard, we've broke them away from their jobs, from their families, we've deployed them hundreds of miles away to the border, and I have yet to hear a good case of why this was absolutely necessary to safeguard our country. And you know, if I heard that case and I believed it, I'd get behind it, but I haven't heard it yet, and therefore I don't support it.
Ms. Sanders.
Well, I wouldn't be for that. First of all, how can we dictate what we need to be doing when we haven't fixed what's going on in our own town? So we need to be trying to correct what's going on in our own state before we try to stop others from coming. We all are immigrants, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. So that's why I'm at with that.
Okay, let me pose to you a question, Ms. Sanders, about health care. I know that you both support Arkansas Works, which is the program that uses Medicaid funding to provide private health insurance for low-income Arkansans. This year, the state will pay for 6% of that program. Next year, the cost rises to 7%, and then 10% in 2020 and thereout. What measures would you support as governor to ensure that the most vulnerable of our citizens have access to affordable health care, and doing so in a way in which state-subsidized health care doesn't eventually bust the budget?
Well, the Affordable Care Act that we have now seems like it's been working pretty well. And the fact that you're trying to make the people actually go and look for work as if they weren't already looking for work to substitute for keeping health insurance is ridiculous. People need jobs regardless of health issues, for health care, and they have been seeking jobs. And for you to label it that the only way that you can keep your insurance is to look for work. We have to think about the rural area now. They're already having problems commuting back and forth. So how are we going to address that avenue as far as them being able to work to keep their health insurance? And if you look at the spectrum altogether, we need to be trying to focus on decreasing the health issues so that maybe possibly we wouldn't have to worry about a health care plan. That should be something we should be analyzing. How do we get the people back in good health more than just making them pay money for something they might not even utilize in the first place?
In addition to that work requirement you talk about, the governor wants to reduce the income threshold for eligibility to 100% of the poverty level, which would remove about 60,000 recipients from the health care rolls. Right. Do you oppose that?
Yes, I do. I do oppose that.
Okay. Ms. Sanders, thanks very much. Mr. Henderson?
Yeah. Well, to the last point that you made, I oppose that as well. And not only because that I believe in the richest country in the world, we should be able to provide access to health care for our citizens, but also in 2018, so many of our hospitals are dependent upon Medicaid to make sure that they don't have uncompensated care, to make sure that they can stay open and provide good service to their patients, and so that they can retain some of the best jobs in our rural communities. And so I do not support the reductions that have been made for that reason. You know, I'd go one step further. You asked this question about how do we afford this over the long term, and that's a serious question. You know, if we could address some of the roots of childhood poverty, if we could acknowledge and start to work on the fact that we have the highest teen pregnancy rate in the country, we could actually reduce the need for Medicaid. We wouldn't be taking it away from anyone that needs it. We'd actually be having fewer people in a decade that would need it, and that would help us shore the system up and be able to afford it.
Ms. Sanders also mentioned the work requirement that is soon to go into place. Would you maintain that as governor, or would you look to repeal that?
Yeah, I don't like the way the law was written. You know, I'd like anyone else. I don't want people to get something that they don't need. I want people to work if they're able-bodied, but the way this policy was drawn up, it puts really onerous reporting requirements on people, and if they make an honest mistake, they can lose health care coverage for an entire year. That's wrong, and we can do better than that.
Okay, the next question is for Ms. Sanders. It comes from Roby.
It actually is for Mr. Henderson.
I'm sorry about that. Right.
I'll keep it straight on our order here, Chris.
Somebody's got to do it.
Let's talk about highway funding, Mr. Henderson. There has been a proposal floated for casinos where the proceeds may go for, the tax proceeds may go for highway funding, but even larger than that. What is your plan for funding Arkansas's highways, their roads and bridges?
Yeah. Well, I'd say two things on that. You know, with respect to casinos, first of all, I think that that can be good, and if local communities choose to do that, I think that they ought to be able to, and I hope that that would be part of a longer-term economic strategy to invest in education to actually help them build more robust economies. You know, in terms of highways, I bring this back to a more fundamental question of tax policy in our state. You know, in January, the governor proposed a tax cut for the most affluent people in our state, and only the most affluent people. And it's projected that that could cost up to $180 million a year. And we need to start by not diminishing the resources that we already have. We need to weigh tax cuts like that against other investments we can make, whether it's highways, whether it's rural roads, whether it's making sure that every child in every community has access to high-speed internet, or whether it's making sure that we're expanding high-quality pre-K to our most vulnerable children. And so I would actually start with very fundamental questions of our tax policy that have been put on the table for the governor, and that'll be at the center of the debate in the next legislative session.
So just to make sure I'm clear, your position would be to not allow for that large upper income tax cut in order to make sure that there is money and funding for potential road projects?
Yes, I think there's a lot of great investments that we can make with that money, and that's where we need to be spending it.
All right. Ms. Sanders, what is your position on the casinos for highways proposal as well as highway funding in general?
I wouldn't agree with as far as the casinos. That's another avenue to where we're taking money from the people and we don't know how the money would be allocated to the funds, the special projects that need to take place. And that's why I came up with the legalizing the recreational 21 and older tax, because that'll be a special project that will actually fund not just the roads or the fire department across the state, but as far as us being able to allocate increasing the teachers' pay. So we need to be looking at the avenues to where money could come in without taking money out at the same time. We don't need to hinder the people. We're trying to make them be stable. And bringing in a casino to take money from them to say that they will be allocating for the roads don't seem like a good idea to me.
And when you mentioned recreational earlier, you meant recreational marijuana, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and we will talk about that issue a little bit later on in the night. Sticking with kind of the theme of taxes, Ms. Sanders, when the governor put up the idea of reducing the income tax from 6.9 to 6%. One of the ideas some lawmakers threw out to pay for that or to offset the lost revenues that Mr. Henderson mentioned, about $180 million, was raising the grocery tax. Now, the governor has come out against that, but I'm wondering, would you as governor be willing to make that deal, raising the grocery tax in order to lower the income tax? And just generally speaking, in Arkansas, are we overtaxed or are we undertaxed?
We are overtaxed, just to put a pinpoint on that last remark you asked. And the people are not benefiting from it. And so I really wouldn't want, to make people pay taxes on things that they need. And that's what's wrong with our country. We need to focus on more of the things that we need to not being taxed, to taxing the things that we want. We need to put our priorities in order as far as we know people need this. So why would we make the taxes higher when we are already increasing the food? So that would be like, we really don't want you to eat. We don't want you to survive by increasing your taxes. And you are already trying to alleviate the food stamps. So that would be a hinder to the people, and I'm not trying to hinder anyone. All I'm trying to do is make sure everyone is being beneficial, and that's what we need to be looking at.
There is an argument out there that a lot of low-income people could still benefit substantially from an income tax cut, even if grocery taxes did go up some because of the level that grocery taxes are at in Arkansas right now. But again, you say no. I
say no, because if you look at Nevada, they don't have tax on food. So it's no tax, so no state taxes, and they generate well. So that's not an avenue that the government should be looking at. We need to be looking at trying to make people stable, and that's not right.
Okay. Mr. Henderson, on the grocery tax, and then also the question of Arkansans in general, overtax versus undertax.
Yeah, no, it's one of the most important questions. And our campaign came out strongly recently against the idea of a grocery tax, especially if it's meant in part to finance a tax for the most affluent citizens. I'd go a step further, though. I mean, I think there's a proven policy that we've seen around the country that we should adopt here that will aid working families. It's the Earned Income Tax Credit. I think there's a huge opportunity there, not only to lighten the burden on our highest need families, but also, and we've seen this over and over again, it'll stimulate the economy. It'll be good for families, it'll be good for consumers, it'll be good for the job market. I think that's the direction we need to be going in.
All right, next question. I'll start with Mr. Henderson. Let's talk about pardons and commutations. This is a rarely used privilege of the governor's office. They can wipe the slate clean for someone convicted of a serious crime. What type of situations would have to exist for you to pardon or to commute someone's sentence?
Yeah. Well, it's hard to answer, without thinking about specific examples, but I will tell you this. I think that one of the most important priorities for our state and for our country in the coming years has to be criminal justice reform. As I've worked in the Delta and in southern Arkansas the last 6 years, I've been in some of our most impoverished communities. I have seen how some of the shortfalls in our education system, how some of the systemic poverty leads to issues in our justice system. And I have seen how our laws and our sentencing are applied disproportionately to people that are in poverty, people of color. And I think that this is one of the most important things that we need to take on. And especially as a governor, when you're looking at, say, commutations of the death penalty and whatnot, I think that we need to look closely at the role that race plays. I think we need to look closely at the role that income plays, because we do see around the country that you tend to have a different experience if you have money or wealth or power going through our legal system.
Just a quick follow-up. You mentioned the death penalty earlier. Where do you stand on the death penalty?
Yeah. As I've said previously on your show, when I was growing up, a lot of my life I was a supporter of it. But in recent years, I've changed my mind on that. You know, as we have increased our technological capabilities, we have seen more and more instances of when people have been wrongly convicted and executed around the country. We have seen instances, when you look at the data, of the death penalty being applied disproportionately to people of color. And that's wrong. We can keep our citizens safe. We can keep our community safe with life imprisonment. We do not have to go as far as the death penalty outside the rare circumstances.
All right. Ms. Sanders, where do you stand on your policy in terms of pardons and commutations and being able to wipe sentences clean? And you can also address the death penalty as well.
Well, with the death penalty, I've always been totally against the death penalty because that's playing God. No one has the right to kill. You're just as guilty as the person that you're sentencing. So who are you to tell them that they no longer can live because whatever circumstances brought them in that situation? And we don't analyze the deal of what's going on because it's two sides to every story, and the other person can't actually articulate the message to you because they're no longer here, and you don't believe the person that's still standing because he's the one that committed the crime. So we need to be trying to focus on rehabilitating that person and analyzing what chemical imbalance that forced him to do the circumstances that went before him. So I'm totally against the death penalty. That's just should be rid of all the way. And as far as pardon, yes, all non-violent offenders should be pardoned, I feel, if I could do that, but I know it's a limit of how many the governor is actually able to pardon. But we are here to make second chance be alive and stay here, and that's the only way we can do that. We don't think about the people's lives that we just sentence on mere minor incidents, and we're not looking at their circumstances regardless what color they are, because we have Caucasians as well that went through this situation. So it's not based more of color, even though that African Americans be the most ones that sustain that. But we have to think about the double jeopardy that they live on by going to prison on nonviolent offenders, crimes, and come back out. And that's what I call it. I call it double jeopardy because once you've been committed for the crime and you come out, you're supposed to be able to be productive citizens back in society, and you do not. You live the life of that crime that is constantly being reminded because you don't have the ability to get work, gain a new home, and that's something that we need to look at.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that, about crime and incarceration. There are some 18,000 inmates in Arkansas prisons right now, and studies have shown that when inmates are released, more than half of them, about 55% in fact, will find their way back into prison within 5 years. What specific steps would you champion as governor to reduce that rate of recidivism in Arkansas and to make it easier for inmates to successfully reintegrate into society, Ms. Sanders?
And it's depending on what type of crime it is. Like I said, on the non-violent offenders, as far as decriminalizing the marijuana, we wouldn't have a mass incarceration. We wouldn't have a recidivism that we would have to worry about on that issue because it'll be already taken care of. We wouldn't have to worry about the people being locked up for a non-toxic plant that was created was created by a creator. So that is something that we wouldn't have to worry about. Now, as far as theft or whatever, we need to analyze that individual and see what is the reason why you're stealing. What can we do to apply resources for you so that you won't have to come back and make the same mistake and not ridicule them because of what they have done when you haven't asked the question of why. And that is something that we need to do, ask the question of why and how can we better help you. Of course, education is the most important thing that we need to make sure is being enforced in our prison. And the second is making sure that we're not only inflicting punishment and pain as Sweden look at us. Sweden look at us as a state of a country of being inflicting punishment and pain, and I do agree. That's something that we need to correct. You are already being punished. Why keep inflicting pain on an individual that's trying to readapt and adjust? We're not allowing that, and that's wrong.
Would you want opportunities for these inmates both inside a prison and then once they get out in terms of education, in terms of job training?
Well, I think they should already have the education before they come out. That would be the first step of growth, that they are actually moving forward to grow themselves. You can't put them out here and then expect for them to get the education when they already be institutionalized. That's something that we have to take care of in there to make sure that they are stable and suitable to come out and function back in society.
Okay, Mr. Henderson, how about this question of recidivism? That is a huge number, 55% of inmates going back inside. It's a problem.
It's an enormous issue, and it's even bigger than the inmates themselves. I mean, I read a statistic recently that Arkansas we have a high number of single-parent households, and one of the single biggest reasons that we do is because of the issue that you're talking about. And so this is not just about the people that have served their time and are getting out, it's also about the children that are missing a parent. And so it's really imperative that we take this on. I mean, I think we put our finger on a few of the options here. Absolutely education and job training while they're serving time. But I think when they get out, once they've paid their debt, once they've served their time, we need to not burden them with unnecessary and unhelpful obstacles to them getting and maintaining employment or housing. We need to give these folks, once they've served their time, we need to give them a fair shot to reintegrate into society, reintegrate into their families, and rebuild their lives. We'll all be better off if we do the right thing here.
All right, I think we're doing good on time, so I'm going to get the boot at halftime here. So I'm going to ask y'all both one more question beyond my limit here. Mr. Henderson, I'll come to you first. If Ms. Sanders wins this primary, will you endorse her in the general election? And to you, Ms. Sanders, I will ask, if Mr. Henderson wins, will you endorse him for the general election? Mr. Henderson.
Yeah, well, I'm going to do, my top goal in this campaign, we set several. My top goal in this campaign is to win, and I believe that we can win, both in the primary and also in the general, and I know Ms. Sanders feels the same way. Beyond that, my secondary goal is to help get as many good Democrats elected as I can. We share a lot of the same values. We believe in a number of the same ideas. And I'm going to work hard to get every good Democrat that I can elected in Arkansas this year as possible.
So that was a yes?
Well, we'll see how the rest of the debate goes. But we agree on a lot. And she's been great. We've run at each other on the campaign trail several times. And I have nothing but good things to say.
All right, Ms. Sanders.
Yes, I've already spoke to Jared about that. That was how I actually introduced myself to him, letting him know that win, lose, or draw, I hope that we can work together. Mm-hmm. It's more based on us being able to get along, and that is what I'm working towards, for us to unify as a whole. So whether I win or lose, he has me in his corner to make sure that we do what we need to do to make this state great.
Thank you.
One of the reasons the Republicans aren't debating at this point is because Jan Morgan has said she would not endorse Asa Hutchinson if he were to win the race. So it's an important question to ask. Let me ask one more question before we go to our break, and that's on the minimum wage. Ms. Sanders, the minimum wage for Arkansas workers right now is at $8.50 an hour. A ballot proposal to raise it to $11 an hour has run into some resistance from the Attorney General. What to you is the appropriate number for the minimum wage in Arkansas? And then how do you balance the needs of workers versus the needs of employers when it comes to the minimum wage?
Well, to answer that question, first of all, we would have to take care of the at-will law, which is standing in a lot of people's way, because they find jobs and still end up losing it because they have this law barrier that keeps people from working, that they have no reason to fire you, and I think that's a problem. So that's something that we need to work on. You just don't need to fire me because you don't like me, you don't like my character. I may have a good character, but it might not be in your means, and you just let me go. That's one of the things that I went through on this campaign. I was working for Nevada Railroad, throwing 350-pound logs, making tracks, and when they found out I was running for governor, they told me that they didn't need me anymore. Basically, they said it wasn't working out. And so that was a problem for me because they couldn't give me a valid reason of why it wasn't working out. It was just they didn't have to tell me anything because this was an at-will state. So they didn't have to give me a reason to let me go. You just go on and your service is no longer needed after being a good worker and the only woman out there that was doing better than the men. And so as far as the minimum wage, we have always been behind. Looking at the statistics, we are like 2 millenniums behind being in the 21st century. So, of course, I would say $13. And that's one of the reasons why I said about the recreational law, because it's going to bring in so much money and revenue, not for just as recreational, but corporate and distributing. So that will be a way that money can grow. You just got to be able to allow it to happen and stop holding it back.
Would you be in favor of allowing individual cities to establish their own rules when it comes to the minimum wage?
That's something that I would have to look into. It all depends on where they're saying, because it don't make a difference where you stay. We're all in a bind. In whatever rural, town, or city we in, we're all in a bind. So we all need to be a part for this state to function well.
Okay, Ms. Sanders, thank you so much. Mr. Henderson, the minimum wage, what number are you comfortable with?
Yeah. You know, it's hard to pick an exact number, but we do know that the minimum wage is simply not high enough right now. You know, I've experienced this from a unique angle in working in education in recent years. It was remarkable to me, you know, working with children and teachers, how you would hear sometimes people lament, you know, the lack of parental engagement sometimes in schools and classrooms. And more often than not, when you dig into that and you would meet the parents of children, it wasn't that they didn't care, they didn't love their kids. It's that they were having to work, you know, 80 hours a week for minimum wage or something slightly above it just to make the math work at home. And so we've got to do more to raise the wages, but we've got to do it in a way that does allow our businesses to thrive so that we actually have good jobs. And that's one of the reasons why one of our central pillars in our platform is small business development. You know, I believe very strongly that if we have more robust small businesses, if they're able to grow, that we can trust, you know, the bosses and managers that live in our own neighborhood to pay us a fair wage more than we can probably trust the CEOs that are 1,000 miles away reporting to some shareholders. And that's one of the reasons that I believe in investing in small business so strongly, not just as a way of creating jobs, but creating better paying jobs that have greater security and will allow us to climb up from the bottom on this issue.
The minimum wage last raised in 2014. What impact do you think it's had on businesses in Arkansas?
Yeah, it's, you know, it's hard to say. I will tell you this. I've talked to dozens, if not hundreds, of small business owners so far on the trail, and it hasn't come up as a serious issue for many of them. I'm sure for some you could find examples, but it hasn't seemed to break their back. But I do think we need to listen to them carefully, not because, you know, we don't need to have workers and families as our highest interest, but because, you know, there are a lot of these businesses that are paying as much as they can, and we need to work with them. But I think we need to do better. Okay,
Mr. Henderson, Ms. Sanders, thank you both so much. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to let Roby tag out, and when we come back, more questions for both the candidates featuring Tamika Edwards. She'll join us right after this.
Our number one priority is to keep you safe during severe weather.
That's why we developed a new partnership called Inside the Storm, connecting Channel 7 meteorologists with a nationwide network of storm chasers.
Each day, we'll bring you incredible images that you can't see anywhere else.
And when Arkansas weather turns dangerous, it's a game changer, giving us more eyes on the sky, allowing us to track severe storms with even more accuracy to alert and protect you like never before.
Inside the Storm, only on Channel 7 News.
I'm a track inspector for the railroad. Normally wake up anywhere from 4:30 to 5. The most important part of daybreak to me is the weather. If it's too hot or if it's too cold or if there's a big temperature change, then I have to do extra precautions for my job to make sure that train keeps on rolling straight. And Melinda definitely makes a difference in that aspect.
That cold air behind the front really settled in on us last night.
My name is Matt. I'm a track inspector, and every morning I start my day with daybreak.
And we welcome you back to tonight's debate with the Democrats running for governor of Arkansas. I'm Chris May. Our candidates, Leticia Sanders, Jared Henderson, continue to join us. And Tamika Edwards from Arkansas Advocates for Children and Families, the Director of Governmental Affairs, joins us now to pose some questions to our candidates as well. Thank you so much for coming in.
Glad to be here.
Your question first for Mr. Henderson.
Okay, good. Mr. Henderson. During the 2015 session, the General Assembly created the Youth Justice Reform Board, an oversight panel aimed at improving the overall effectiveness of the state's juvenile justice system. National trends in juvenile justice reform supports shifting resources from incarcerating young people to implementing community-based alternatives such as highly structured day or evening treatment programs. As governor, what would you do to reduce the number of kids who are locked up?
Yes, well, I'm so glad that you asked this. This is another example of something that I've seen firsthand in my work in recent years. And I think that it is one of the most important pieces of the puzzle of how we create opportunity in every county and every community. You know, the first thing that I'd like to do, I would certainly continue to throw my support behind the progress that's been made. These are important priorities that we've set. These are important initiatives that we've worked on and that we've started progress on. Beyond that, though, the other thing that I would like to bring in as a central tenet of my administration would be a belief in an investment in local institutions. You know, one of the things that's given me so much hope and optimism about this state is that in every place that I've gone, I have met incredible, smart, talented people who already have a finger on what their biggest needs are, whether it's for their children or their job market. They're usually already organized, they're already working, and they're making progress. But they usually need extra investment, they need some red tape cut, they need just a little bit extra help to meet the local needs. And so one of the things that I would want to bring into this discussion, and many others, is starting with the assumption that we've got smart and talented people everywhere. And we need to go in, we need to listen to them with respect and humility, and we need to show up ready to help rather than just coming in with our answers from the Capitol in Little Rock.
Okay, Ms. Sanders.
My theory is that we need to get with the government for the broken system that they have and let parents actually discipline their children. So we wouldn't have the problem of juveniles because parents are not allowed to discipline the children like we used to have. And as we grew up, you've been able to actually take charge of your household, which has been taken away with scan as if everyone is being beaten. Now, I understand that it is people that has been whooped or disciplined differently, but then that's a different scenario. But just altogether saying that a parent cannot take control of their child is the reason why we have it. And it seems to me as if they came up with that idea just to create crime on juveniles, and mostly African-American children, because they are just able to be in the street and run wild. We need to put a control on our youth and give resources so that they would take the time out to do other things than run the street. That's all we have for them is the avenue of being in the street. What else? What other type of resources do we have to provide for them to actually look different? And that's two things that need to happen. We need to give the parents back the control of their children and provide resources for our youth.
Mr. Henderson, with your background in education, do you agree that discipline starts in the home or needs to start in the home?
Well, certainly there's a big role to be played there. You know, I would bring it back, though, to the original question around just how we look at and how we treat our children, right? And I've seen in my experience the differences in how we treat children that are growing up in low-income homes, the differences in how we treat children that are people of color. Those differences can start as early as 4 or 5 years old. I've seen kids of the same age that commit the same offense treated differently and more severely based on who their parents are or where they come from. And that's wrong. You know, I think there is a role for discipline for sure, and I'm thinking more and more about that as a new parent. But, you know, I also think that we need to not lose sight of compassion and a fundamental belief that if we give our kids a fair opportunity and high expectations, we can expect and we will see way more often than not good things from them.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about education. The Arkansas Department of Education recently published index scores and grades for the state's public schools. More than 450 did receive A's or B's, but 587, Ms. Sanders, graded average or below, including 33 schools that received failing grades. How would your approach to improving education in Arkansas differ from your opponents and also from the current administrations?
It would differ by starting the pre-K. We allow the system to put stipulations on when our child is old enough to learn. When the child is born, they are already learning. They have the senses to know who they belong to when they hit the earth. So who are we to say that they don't have the capability to understand what's going on until they're 4 or 5 years old, which is untrue. We can grasp our children early on, and that's anywhere beginning from 1 and 2. They understand what's going on regardless if they're potty trained or not. They know what no-no mean. They know what stop mean. And so for us to build our literacy up is to start early. As far as foreign language as well, we wait till they like in the 5th and 6th grade instead of starting it when they start in kindergarten. If you want them to be aware of different languages, we should start when they start the English language. It would be more suitable for them to do that. As far as the education, I'm for changing the curriculum as far as making sure that our 9th and 12th grade is focusing on more of the basic college hours, so that can alleviate some of the money, debt, and time is seeking higher education. They already know how to read and write. That's why we're passing them on. But actually preparing them for school, it's a right. We need to do that in the 9th and the 12th grade. We need to have them prepared for college so they can already feel if that's what they want, or even just give them the opportunity for vocational technical programs as well, which need to be across the state. That's always been a problem because everybody don't see themselves as far as going to college, but we need to have avenues for everyone.
Okay, Mr. Henderson, education, how would your approach differ from Governor Hutchinson?
Yeah, Well, you mentioned the school grading system, and I think that's one of a long list of examples of how we as a state and frankly as a country have missed the biggest point here in our education system. Our goal has to be to make sure that every child has a fair shot to reach their full potential. And if you look at places that have achieved excellence and equity in the United States and around the country, around the world, you find that they focus on the teaching profession. If we want to help every child reach their full potential, we have to make teaching one of our most attractive, healthy, and sustainable and respected professions. If we can get a great human being in every classroom, if we can keep the great ones that are already there, if we can give them the training they need, the resources they deserve, and then get out of their way, we will have a fighting shot of building a good education system. If we do not get that part right, technology won't save us. We can send our kids to schools and palaces. We can design all of the teacher evaluation systems and school ranking systems you want. But we need to be spending almost all of our energy figuring out how do we keep our best teachers and how do we attract the best of the next generation into our most important and one of our most difficult and challenging professions.
Well, let me follow up. You've talked about dramatically boosting teacher salaries. How do you go about doing that?
Yep.
And then how else do you otherwise incentivize teachers to come to Arkansas and stay?
Yeah. Well, so first, let me start with your second question, then I'll answer the first one. There's a lot that we could do tomorrow to just get out of teachers' way. We've designed a teacher evaluation system in recent years that was well-intended and it was designed by a lot of smart people. But what we found a few years into its implementation is we're applying it to board-certified veterans in their 15th year the same way we're applying it to rookies that are struggling through their second semester. We need to just stop. And if we can stop that, we can not only give teachers hours back of their lives, not only the energy that comes with that, we can also return to them a measure of respect. Now, which is important to keeping our best teachers and recruiting great ones in. In terms of teacher pay, I have quick things to say about that. One, the idea that the resources aren't there to do this or to at least get a good start, simply not true. We're debating a $180 million tax cut right now. That is enough to give $5,000 a year to every teacher in the state. And I don't think you would apply it blanket like that, but I make that point to say the idea that the resources simply aren't there is not true. Now, if we want to raise teachers not just marginally, but dramatically over time, we are going to have to make some very different changes in our budget, and that's not going to be easy. But we can get there in years if we solve some of our underlying problems, like childhood poverty. If we can reduce the need for Medicaid, for example, which is our second largest expenditure as a state, we'll find ourselves with tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars a year to invest in our teachers. Okay,
and Ms. Sanders, let me give you another 30 seconds on this. UA Little Rock released a survey recently that found 58% of African American respondents who live in Little Rock believe they don't think all children have an equal opportunity to get a good education in this city. What's your response to that, and how do we make that better?
True. They don't get the same opportunity. First of all, as far as black people or children that want to attend, I want to say the private school or the Catholic school, the funding is too high. And so whatever they're being taught should be applied in the public school. What makes it different? Just because you have money, they need to be taught differently? That's not the way we want our world to be. And it's a right, not a privilege. And so, like I said, it's the way we structure the lesson plan. And it would start as far as putting our kids in school as early as 2 years old. I was able to convince my teacher to allow me to attend school in Chicago at 2, which I was supposed to be 3. But I convinced them to allow me to start at 2, which was a blessing. So it's all about listening to the children. We focus on the children, you get a better response because they know what they need and they can speak it to you. You just block it out.
Okay, Ms. Sanders, thank you very much. The next question is from Mr. Henderson, and it comes from Tamika Edwards.
So I want to wrap up this conversation that we're having on education, juvenile justice, and how do we make a better start for children. So after school and summer programs offer safe and caring environments for children while their parents are at work. And these programs have been shown to improve performance and workforce readiness. A recent poll was released that showed that 76% of Arkansans support state funding for after-school and summer programs, but many of those initiatives remain unfunded. How would you ensure that Arkansas kids have access to out-of-school programs that keep them learning and help their parents stay at work?
Yeah. I'm so glad you asked this question. I was think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was at the Boys and Girls Club in Phillips County in Helena, West Helena. And so I saw firsthand just a prime example of the types of initiative that you're referring to. And I don't know that I can think of a better investment that we could make as a state than in programs and in people that are doing stuff like that. You know, when we can keep our kids busy, we can keep them doing constructive things, it not only keeps them out of trouble, it builds their confidence, it builds their sense of self-worth, and it bleeds over into every aspect of their lives. It makes them more productive learners and ultimately more productive citizens. And so I think, you know, the question's less how can we afford this, it's how can we not. And if we look even briefly in most of our communities, you see people that are already working on this. In some places it's as sophisticated as a Boys and Girls Club. In some cases it's more scrappy but still making a meaningful difference. We need to get in and make it a priority to invest in these organizations and these people.
Ms. Sanders, same question to you. What would you do to ensure that these programs are around for kids?
Boys and Girls Clubs is very prominent. And so I know there's some type of grant money out there that the government can actually research to fund this. There's so much money out there that haven't been utilized that we can grab for these type of programs. And that's something that we need to look at, and not as far as raising tax money to do it, because we don't have to. It's just too much money out there for us to keep coming up with negative ideas to generate funds when you just got to research it and look for it and grab it because we have it there. And another one is actually letting the school probably stay open a little longer. That way the teachers can actually work a little bit more with the kids after 5, you know, and that's something we can look at as well. It's ways that we can help these children. It's just we need to find the available funds, and I think it's in the grants.
Okay, Tamika, thank you very much. Let's talk about the issue of abortion. Ms. Sanders, some of the latest figures show about 4,500 abortions are performed in Arkansas each year. There are significant restrictions in our state on abortion: mandatory counseling for women, a waiting period, parental consent, limits on funding, a ban on the procedure after 20 weeks with a handful of exceptions. How would you, as governor, approach those restrictions? Would you maintain them? Would you look to expand them, or would you campaign to eliminate them?
I'm not really for abortions, but I know it's a necessity for people that have health issues and individuals that have been raped. That is my main concern of what abortion should actually be utilized for. Not for an individual who's not protecting themselves and knowing under the circumstances that they actually can't afford this life. So if we're being more proactive about the situation, then we can better practice safety as far as being out there and not. We have too much going on. It's not just babies going on. We have diseases going on. So we should probably be enforcing more of protection so that we won't have these problems. But as far as you not having any health issues or being raped, I'm not for it.
So you're only, rape, incest, and the life of the mother, those are the only times you believe abortion should be legal?
Yes.
Okay, Ms. Sanders, thanks. Mr. Henderson, abortion and the laws in Arkansas as they apply to the procedure, how do you approach them?
Well, you know, I was born to an unmarried teenage mother almost 40 years ago, and she made the decision in the first week of my life to give me up for adoption to a family that wanted nothing more than to have a baby. So I've been thinking about this for decades before I set foot into the political arena. But I'll tell you, at the end of the day, you know, I trust a woman and her doctors, her family, and her ministers to make the right decision more than I trust a legislature in Little Rock or in Washington, D.C. And that's where I come down on this. And, you know, given my own personal experience, I don't want abortion to occur any more often than possible here. And, you know, as governor, I want to challenge all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to take steps that we can take to reduce the need. You know, we have the highest teen pregnancy rate in the country, or one of the highest most years. We can do something about that. And I would argue there are a few things, if any, that we could do that could make a greater reduction in the number of abortions that we have in this state. But we need to take action. We need to get serious about this, and we need to work together.
Okay, the next question comes from Tamika for Mr. Henderson.
So we've talked a lot, or just a little bit, or alluded to tonight, marijuana use.
Yeah.
And as you know, several states or citizens therein, including Arkansas, have approved the use of marijuana for medical and in some cases recreational use. The city of Little Rock will soon consider making marijuana arrests a low priority. You mentioned criminalization and other things earlier. Our state has a steadily growing and unsustainable prison population, due in part to an increase in marijuana-related arrests. Considering these developments, what is your position on the decriminalization of marijuana?
Yeah. Well, first I want to just say it's outrageous that we haven't made medical marijuana available yet. You know, the Arkansas voters said a long time ago that they wanted patients in Arkansas to have this, and we need to get it done. With respect to recreational marijuana and decriminalization, you know, if that's something that the voters of Arkansas decide that they want, I'll get behind that as governor and support it. You know, and for me, it's as simple as that. I think that it is an opportunity, and I've heard from law enforcement officials all over the state, from more than a few sheriffs in the counties that I've been in, that their jails are bursting at the seams, and they are looking for ways to alleviate the pressure, both through more revenue, but also through fewer inmates. And I think looking at our nonviolent offenders, people that are serving time behind bars just for marijuana use, it probably doesn't make sense. And if we can back off from that and not only alleviate the strain on our prisons, but also not punish people in a way that doesn't fit the crime, I think we should do it.
Ms. Sanders, same question.
Well, of course, you know, I'm all for it. That's on my platform, to decriminalize the cannabis. I mean, we have to think back that God created it for us. That was one of the plants that He wanted us to have as far as medical purposes, industrial purposes, and environment purposes. If we don't know or not aware that the T4 was actually made off of hemp, it was actually ran off of hemp fuel, that would, if we would have stood by that, we could have a better population as far as economy-wise. We wouldn't have much pollution as we do have, and it's a necessity. Because when you look at the FAFSA application to fill it out, that's the only question they ask you. Have you ever been convicted of possession or distribute? So if they have, they can't get their life back. So lowering the punishment, it have to be more than just lowering. You have to eradicate it for it to be feasible for the people to be beneficiary of it. And that's what I plan to do once I become governor, is alleviate it.
And to put a fine point on your plan, do you want to offer $450 annual permits in order to purchase recreational marijuana legally, if you could work a plan through the legislature? Is that correct? That's
correct. I think it's more suitable than where Colorado have it, because you probably could be paying more. They have it to where you're paying anywhere from 15 to 28% off your purchase. When I'm just saying you buy it, the recreational to cover you, to make sure that the police is not harassing you. And long as you have that on your driver license, they can't mess with you. I didn't say they couldn't stop you, because we still would need them to do their job for us to be able to prosper from it. We can't prosper if they don't do their job with it. But our recidivism will be low, because if they don't have the recreational tax on their driver license and they have consumed marijuana, could they be locked up? Possibly, but no record. And the only reason why I say that they could probably be locked up is because we need that fund to be able to help us with our special projects. This fund is to help us eradicate some of the imposed taxes that the state have. And we need that. It won't go on your record, but we need you to be able to pay it. If you want to indulge in that activity, then you need to be responsible and pay for the tax that we allowing you to have to help you stay on your feet.
30 seconds. Do you see this as an economic issue? Could Arkansas benefit economically from selling marijuana?
Sure. I mean, it's like anything else that you tax. You know, we're now seeing some examples. If we decide to go in this direction as a state, we have some real examples to estimate, you know, what we could gain from that economically. And I do think there are good things that we could do with those resources. It's one of the reasons why, like I said, if the voters put this on the ballot and they decided they wanted it, I would get behind it.
Okay, on the issue of guns, both of you, I know, oppose the enhanced concealed carry law that passed the last legislature. It allows firearms to be carried on college campuses and other places where they were once off limits. Would you as governor, Ms. Sanders, have vetoed that legislation, even at the risk of being overridden. And more broadly, how do you balance the Second Amendment rights that Arkansans enjoy with concerns for gun violence?
Well, like you said, I'm totally against guns. I don't feel like guns is the solution. If we be able to help the people become better, we will no longer need guns. But I'm sure that we are aware that it is individuals that are mentally challenged out there that we do need to help. But I would have never allowed it to be on the campus, because then that's creating problems, and I don't want to see a catastrophe. You know, we already witnessed one about 20 years ago in Jonesboro, and we've seen a lot across the state with mass shooting. So I'm totally against it. It's one of the reasons why I hope that the people will not pick my other opponent that has a gun range, because it's not like you're for the people. You have to think about the people, and everybody is not out here to hurt. And the police is one of the ones that will actually pull the guns out. And we need to be able to teach them how to de-escalate situations instead of escalating them. We cannot allow the police to be the officer, the executioner, and the judge. That's not your duty. Your duty is to protect and serve, and that's what we need, and that's what we need the people to do. You are allowed to bear the right to bear arms, to protect yourself, not go out here and just do heinous crimes. And that's mostly what we see, and then it's on the African American people. So that's something that we have to put in order, because we all are affected. We all are infected. It's not just one. We all are.
A lot of gun owners in Arkansas, Mr. Henderson. What do you want them to know about how you would handle guns as governor?
Yeah. Well, I think two things I'd say. I mean, first of all, you know, I can count on one hand the number of people in Arkansas politics that I've really talked to that want to take away, you know, the right to self-defense, the right to hunt, even the right to sport from people. You know, guns are part of our culture here, and I think that law-abiding citizens should be able to keep their guns. But the second thing that I want people to know, you know, we're seeing the leadership and the voice, we're hearing the voice of the Parkland students, but I don't know that everyone is also hearing the voices that I've heard when I've been in schools in the state. And I will tell you, the single most common question I get from kids that I meet is on guns. And they just don't understand how our debate has gotten to the place that it's gotten. They hear that there's some consensus to keep guns away from people that have a history of violence. They hear that there's, you know, some consensus about strengthening background checks, about making them safer, but they don't see any action. Instead, they hear ideas about arming their teachers. And it doesn't make sense to them. And we need to listen to them. We need to come to our senses. We need to stop triggering these polarizing debates, and we need to act on some of the common ground that we have to make people safer. And none of that's inconsistent with law-abiding citizens keeping their guns and honoring the Second Amendment.
Okay, our hour has flown by. We have more questions to ask, but we are to the end of our time, so we are going to move now to the closing statements from each one of our candidates. Mr. Henderson, we'll start with you.
Sure. Well, thank you all for hosting so much. Leticia, thank you so much for being here, and I've really enjoyed our time together. You know, a number of times in this discussion, I've referred to the people that I met on the trail, and you know, there was one young lady that I'd like to end by mentioning tonight. Her name is McKenna. I met her in a recent school visit in Helena. She's an 8th grader, and I got to speak to her and her classmates during their social studies hour. And they asked me a bunch of questions, but the one that I remember most was McKenna asked me where I grew up and where I went to school. And I told her that I went to Springdale. And McKenna just looked down and she said, yeah, that's the best place to grow up. And, you know, a few months ago, during his State of the State address, Governor Hutchinson said that the state of our state has never been stronger. That's just not true in most of our counties. It's just not. And McKenna knows it, and other students like her know it. And that's not acceptable. And it's not only unacceptable because it's wrong, it's unacceptable because it doesn't have to be that way. We need to expect more for our state. We need to set bolder goals. We need to be more focused on the things that will unlock opportunity in our education system, that will unlock business creation and growth, especially small businesses in our smallest towns. We need to protect our rural hospitals and access to health care. And we need to get serious and look squarely in the eye some of the things that are driving generational poverty in this state. We have a rich, proud history. We built some of the greatest businesses in the world. We have one of the most important agricultural sectors on the planet. We have a history of being able to do great things, but it starts by setting big goals. And I'm running for governor because I want the next chapter of this state to be as great as the best moments from our history. And so thank you all for listening tonight, and I ask for your vote in this primary in this November.
Mr. Henderson, thank you so much. Ms. Sanders, you have 2 minutes for your closing statement.
Well, I want to thank you for inviting me, and Jared, you accepting it. It doesn't matter really where you stay, long as you can be productive and have opportunities, you can grow anywhere. But we need to make sure our children are safe. We need to make sure our elders are safe. We need to make sure everybody in the state of Arkansas is safe and running off natural resources. We are known by the natural state, so we should function naturally off natural resources. I'm totally against guns as far as in the school place and for our teachers to have. As you said, I understand that you have the right to bear arms, and I also want you to keep in mind that if you have a medical license, they want to take away your rights of bearing arms, which is not right. So I'm running to protect the people. I'm one of the people, and I'm for the people, and I want to make sure that everyone have opportunity, fair chance, unify, come together, and be productive. And that's why I need your support and your vote in the primary and in November.
Ms. Sanders, thank you so much. That wraps up our debate for tonight. Our thanks to both of our candidates for being here. Our thanks to Roby Brock and to Tamika Edwards as well. Glad to have you. And our thanks to you at home for watching. Primary day in Arkansas, of course, is May 22nd. The general election on November 6th. We encourage you to vote and make your voice heard. Good night.